It was a bloody rebellion. Thousands butchered. The countryside laid waste. It was a hell on earth. The rebel band was composed of ethnically mixed tribes known collectively as Gauls. Their champion was the first general to unite the various tribes. He was Vercingetorix. His nemesis was one of the most celebrated and ruthless generals in history, Julius Caesar. For 100 years, the Romans had contained and oppressed the Gauls. Now, it was payback time. The stage was set for one of the greatest military confrontations of the ancient world. A war of technological wonders that tested to the full the cunning and resourcefulness of the two generals. The battle shaped the destiny of Europe for centuries to come and guaranteed the future of the Roman Empire. The year was 52 BC. For 6 years, Julius Caesar had conducted a savage campaign, the goal of which was to conquer the territory called Gaul and turn it into a subject province of Rome. By the time Caesar was given command in Gaul in 58 BC, the Republic had already extended its dominions into North Africa, Greece, Sicily, Corsica, Sidonia, now Crete, and Spain. But Rome had never been able to subdue its warlike neighbor to the north, Gaul.
It had always been a little tentative about northward expansion because the Gauls and the Romans had a long history, 300-year history, of mutual slaughter and antagonism. I mean, these people in the north, when they went on invasions, were pretty brutal people. I mean, they sacked Rome in the 3rd century BC as well. So there's a lot of bad blood.
But Republican Rome grew stronger each day. Now commanding more than 50,000 troops, Julius Caesar fought his way across Gaul with speed and venom.
Caesar was sent to Gaul by the Roman Senate as a proconsul, that is to say, to conquer the area and turn it into a province of Rome. The interesting thing about this great general is he had never been in the military and had absolutely no experience in combat or command at all. So why then do we regard him as a great general? It's a fair question to ask. And the answer is he was the first Roman general to leave not only his memoirs, but a detailed account of all his campaigns, which of course point to his brilliance and nothing else.
Caesar wrote enough about the 6-year Gallic War to fill 7 volumes. While he regarded himself as a military genius, his successes were, in part, due to the high quality of his army.
By the time of the campaigns in Gaul, the Roman army was almost thoroughly professionalized. Prior to 100 BC, it had always been a militia army, so you had to raise new troops every year, train them, and then put them in control of political generals, and that created problems.
But military reforms, instituted 50 years before Caesar rose to prominence, had created a disciplined army of full-time professional legionaries.
You might have had a, quote, amateur in charge of this thing, but there were 10 legions of professional soldiers. That's one point, which accounts for Caesar's success. The other point, I think, is that you can always be a great general if you're not fighting against anyone. And in the case of the armies of Gaul, they really weren't significant armies.
Gaul was not a unified entity with a national fighting force. It was a conglomeration of individual tribal armies that lacked discipline and cohesion.
The fundamental problem with Gaul is that it was essentially an area of 15 to 20 million people. Lots of different ethnic groups. They fought with one another for generations, and they never developed a sophisticated military capability.
Nevertheless, the conquest of Gaul was more difficult than Caesar anticipated.
You couldn't just defeat one army, win a battle, and Gaul was yours. You had to defeat hundreds of little armies.
Caesar dealt with each new Gallic army with increasing ruthlessness.
Caesar carried out some horrendous slaughters as a typical Roman brutality of making the case that it's either Roman friendship or Roman terror.
Caesar's really was a reign of terror. He destroyed entire villages, killed everyone in them, and then he went on to the next one. Absolutely brutal.
And inevitably, over a period of 6 years, what had happened was basically Roman control in Gaul was pretty much established. But underneath it all was a simmering spirit of hatred for the Romans and spirit of revolt, just looking for a leader to spark it.
Enter Vercingetorix, the charismatic leader of the Arverni tribe. Like Caesar, he also had a mission: to unite the hundreds of disparate Gallic clans of his homeland against the might of the empire. Vercingetorix was a worthy adversary to Caesar. As a young man, he had trained with and fought alongside the Roman legions.
Vercingetorix was actually a cavalryman in Caesar's army early in the Gallic Wars. So he knows how the Roman army worked. He knows its strength, he knows its weaknesses. He is the right guy at the right time to take on Caesar.
Vercingetorix took it into his head that perhaps this was the right time, that the Gauls had probably finally had it, not this tribe or that tribe, but everyone, and that if he could provoke a spark with an attack on the Romans that was successful, what might happen is, for the first time, all of the main tribes of Gaul would assemble together and resist Roman rule, defeat Caesar, and drive the Romans out. And that's what he had in mind.
His plan to provoke Caesar into action worked immediately. Vercingetorix marched more than 70,000 soldiers into the Roman-controlled town of Orleans and gave Caesar a taste of his own medicine.
And he fell upon it like a lion upon a rabbit, and burnt the town and massacred and murdered everybody.
The Gauls slaughtered over 5,000 men, women, and children. In doing so, Vercingetorix delivered a clear message to Caesar that the Gauls would no longer endure the Roman general's regime of oppressive cruelty.
This was the spark of revolt. There was some signal event that would galvanize all of Gaul against the Rome, and that's what he tried to do. He was a fairly good strategic thinker, and it worked.
This was the moment. There was now no turning back for Vercingetorix. The rising had begun. He and Caesar were set on a collision course to total war. And Vercingetorix had both the momentum and the will.
Soon he's scoring more victories. He has a massive army behind him, and he's using it well. Suddenly, this guy is unstoppable.
Despite outnumbering the Romans, Vercingetorix knew that his massive but disorganized force would lose a conventional battle against Caesar's highly trained professional army. So his strategy was to strike incessantly at the enemy in small guerrilla-style sorties until it inflicted so much damage that the legions would be forced to retire back to Italy.
Vercingetorix has a policy just to keep harassing the Romans, keeping them away from food, generally giving Caesar a headache.
To further wrong foot and destabilize the Roman troops, Vercingetorix did something that would reverberate throughout military history. He persuaded the Gauls to set fire to their own towns, villages, crops, and countryside. It's an uncompromising stratagem, now known as scorched earth.
Burn everything. Burn the towns, burn the hamlets, burn the fields, everything. In other words, leave nothing upon which the Roman army can survive.
In August of 52 BC, after implementing his scorched earth policy, Vercingetorix led a small detachment against a Roman force near present-day Dijon. The Gauls' favorite weapon was the broadsword. Made of iron, the heavy blade was designed to smash down on an opponent with devastating force. The Roman legionary wielded a gladius. 26 inches long, 2.5 inches wide, the gladius was made of razor-sharp steel and was used as a stabbing weapon. After several hours of close combat at Dijon, Vercingetorix, in his signature hit-and-run style, retreated. The plan appears to have worked. From Dijon, the Romans began to retire toward the Italian border. Vercingetorix gave chase, hoping to prevent Caesar from reaching Rome and restocking his depleted army.
He moves his army down to block Caesar's goal going to Italy, okay? He really arrives too late. Caesar is already south of where he comes. So he's behind Caesar. He's not in front of him. And he tries to go into the attack. The Romans turn around. There's a skirmish there. There's a skirmish there, and the Romans break it off. And at that point, what Vercingetorix does is he says, you know, it's getting tough to feed the army out here. I'm going to withdraw back into my main supply base, all right? And hopefully, you know, Caesar, we're done for the season. Caesar will go south, and we'll finish this next year.
This proved to be a serious miscalculation. Thinking that Caesar would retreat all the way to Rome, Vercingetorix began to take his army back to its base at Alessia, a fortified town impregnable except to famine. But Caesar wasn't going home. He was going after Vercingetorix.
And what Caesar does is, instead of running for Italy, he whirls around on him, kills his rear guard, and begins to chase him back to Alessia.
As Caesar attacked the Gallic rear guard, Vercingetorix and the remainder of his troops sought refuge in their walled town of Alessia. Within days, Caesar's 50,000 legionaries had surrounded them.
I mean, they just kept coming and coming. A total of 10 Roman legions suddenly surrounded Vercingetorix. He must have said to himself, what the hell have I gotten myself into here?
Vercingetorix had enjoyed substantial success in waging a guerrilla war against Caesar. But at this moment he was trapped, and the small advantage the Gauls held had completely evaporated. This was Caesar's kind of battle, and he was about to conduct one of the most amazing siege operations the ancient world had ever seen. '52 BC, the fortified Gallic hill town of Alessia. The Roman military commander, Julius Caesar, and more than 50,000 Roman soldiers had trapped 70,000 Gauls and their revolutionary leader, Vercingetorix, inside its walls.
Alessia is so important because it's a big final cataclysm. It's the last shot, militarily, at stopping the Roman control of all of Gaul.
Alessia was the present-day town of Alise-Saint-Reine, near Dijon in France. It was protected by a surrounding wall about 5 miles in circumference and probably no more than 6 feet high. Home to about 10,000 people, Alessia was situated on a mountain approximately 1,500 feet above a wide valley which was surrounded by hills. Through the valley around the town ran 2 small rivers, the Ossa and the Osseran. It was well protected, giving the Gauls a strong defensive position. Nonetheless, Caesar decided to lay siege to Alessia, initiating a military campaign unlike any other in history.
The siege works created by Caesar are just ingenious. And I can't find anyone or any source to say that his siege techniques that he used there had been used before.
Caesar possessed the most sophisticated siege technology of the age. The army was equipped with a catapult called an onaga. Known as the wild ass for the power of its kick, it was capable of launching a 100-pound projectile 400 yards. The Romans also employed the ballista. Latin for stone thrower, the ballista fired lead shot up to 100 yards. Each Roman legion was equipped with 30. But a siege involved more than an attack using high-tech offensive weapons, and Caesar realized that the best tactical move at Alessia wasn't to mount an all-out assault. Instead, he believed that to win this encounter, he shouldn't try to drive the Gauls out, but rather, he should starve them out. Caesar decided to build a 10-mile wall around Alessia to imprison the Gauls within their own town. What Vercingetorix thought would be a safe haven was turning out to be a death trap. First, the legionaries dug a trench 20 feet deep and 20 feet wide. Then they dug another trench, 15 feet wide and 8 feet deep, the that could be filled with water. Next, another dry pit. And finally, work began on a wall, 12 feet high, complete with watchtowers every 80 yards.
They call it circumvallation. You put up a wall around the city. It's essentially putting tens of thousands of people in prison.
The purpose of that was, of course, to make sure that no one in the city could break out. They could get outside their own walls, but only to be trapped in a killing ground between the Roman wooden wall and their wall. That's the first thing.
This was not the first time Caesar had shown himself to be an expert practitioner of technological warfare. 3 years earlier, in 55 BC, 400,000 Germans went looking for new land to settle and crossed the River Rhine to set up home in Gaul. Caesar immediately delivered an emphatic response. He sent 50,000 troops to the Rhine with an order to slaughter all the Germans, sparing no one. What he did next was both horrific and, from an engineering point of view, astounding.
Caesar foreshadowed his engineering prowess they will eventually show at Alessia. He built a 400-foot-long, 40-foot-wide suspension bridge over the Rhine River so that he could chase them back to Germany and hunt them down.
Once across the river, Caesar's troops ran amok through the countryside, showing no mercy.
430,000 people, men, women, children, no survivors, in a deliberately calculated act of political butchery designed to send a clear message to another people.
Brutality aside, Caesar's spanning of the Rhine stands as a remarkable engineering achievement. He built the bridge over a wide and fast-flowing river in only 10 days.
It was incredible. I mean, he built it with posts and beams and cabling. And the reason he built it was to say to the Germans, look, the Rhine isn't a barrier. We could come and get you anytime we want.
After the butchery was over, the Romans went back to Gaul and burned the bridge behind them. At Allesia, Caesar employed his technological superiority again, this time to pen the Gauls inside their city. The Gallic general Vercingetorix watched with trepidation as Caesar's wall rose up around him. The 12-foot-high structure was built partly with the earth dug out of the trenches. It was reinforced with wooden ramparts and surmounted by watchtowers every 80 yards.
On top of all that, they put sharpened sticks, kind of like an early version of barbed wire, just in case someone tries to scale the thing. And except for a couple of areas, like places with natural barriers, this wall goes completely around the city.
It was a race against time. Once Caesar had completed the wall, almost 10 miles in circumference, it would be practically impenetrable and forcibly enclose the entire population of Allesia, some 10,000 men, women, and children, as well as the new tenants, the 70,000-strong Gallic army.
Vercingetorix does have some beef and corn stored up at Alessia, but it's not going to last forever. Caesar's men could go and try to steal some or buy some supplies, but that's easier said than done. Don't forget, Vercingetorix had burnt a lot of it during the Scorched Earth campaign.
Vercingetorix well understood that the winner of this battle would be the one who could stave off starvation for longer. He decided his best hope was to try to halt construction of the wall and prevent the Romans from collecting food.
If he can outlast Caesar in the city, okay, sooner or later the Roman army would find it very hard to gather supplies, and it too would wither on the vine. What he had to do is he had to keep attacking the Roman army to prevent it from foraging from supplies.
So Vercingetorix resorted to his old tactic, hit and run. He sent several thousand of his cavalry to harass the Roman builders and foragers. He succeeded with this several times, but finally, during one of these assaults, Caesar launched a surprise counterattack.
We're not exactly sure how many cavalry Caesar had, but I would imagine about 5,000 or 6,000 Roman cavalry and 3,000 to 4,000 mercenary cavalry.
A skirmish broke out in the area between Caesar's wall and Allesia. The Roman cavalry gained the upper hand and the Gauls were driven back. But Vercingetorix ordered Allesia's gates to be closed to safeguard the people already inside.
Very, very heavy Gallic losses. Guys off their horses trying to basically claw their way back into the city.
Vercingetorix had sentenced his cavalry raiders to certain death. '52 BC, the siege of Allesia saw its first bloodshed. A cavalry skirmish led to an horrific end for the Gauls.
Despite winning this little skirmish, Caesar decides to up the ante in terms of the siege works. He orders more trenches to be dug, anti-personnel devices to be installed, and death traps to be built.
Booby traps with lethal sharpened wooden spikes called chippy were planted in the bottom of the trenches. Iron barbs called stimuli were spread out in front of the walls to puncture soldiers' feet and horses' hooves.
Flooded moats were there, trees knocked down to create obstacles, and covering it all would be whatever field guns they had, arrows, archer fire, slinger fire, missiles. They could literally sheath fire into an impact zone.
After only 5 weeks, the 10-mile wall, equipped with pitfalls, obstacles, and anti-personnel devices, was complete. The Gallic general Vercingetorix was forced to take an audacious gamble. He sent his entire 15,000-strong cavalry force to ride across Gaul to recruit volunteers from the other tribes.
Well, this seems to be a smart move. Think about this for a minute. He had pretty good success just snipping at Caesar, harassing him, not letting him get anywhere, not allowing him to gather food. But he's giving all of that up, and he says, no pun intended, send in the cavalry.
Vercingetorix changes his tactical design and allows the Romans, in essence, to build the siege works and feed their own.
The decision to go for help, rather than continuing to disrupt the food gatherers and wall builders, was a critical military decision. If the cavalry was intercepted, or the other tribes didn't respond, Vercingetorix and his army were surely doomed.
Now, without his cavalry to send forth to harass the Roman army, they can build the siege works at their leisure, which they do. More important than that is they now can forage freely. And what Caesar understands is clearly, what does he say? He orders his commissariat to make sure you collect a 30-day supply of grain.
Caesar knew that if the Gallic cavalry did return with significant reinforcements, it could spell his defeat. To defend against this possibility, he decided to build another wall, about 400 yards outside the first. Caesar's first wall kept Vercingetorix in. The second was designed to keep reinforcements out. But it would also contain 50,000 of his own men who had to camp in between the two structures.
Outside this wall of circumvallation, you construct a second wall called contravallation, Latin contra, against. And this wall ran 20 miles. So you have a wall inside a wall in a city in the middle, kind of like looking at from the top down, kind of looking at a layer cake.
Suddenly, with no enemy horsemen to disrupt them, the Romans could build the second wall with comparative ease. It was seamless, except for a small section at the point where the two shallow rivers ran through the valley.
With the wall construction coming to an end, everyone starts realizing that the thing that's going to win or lose this thing is food. Caesar knows that once the rest of the Gauls show up, he won't be able to send his guys foraging anymore. Meanwhile, inside the city, Vercingetorix personally takes control of the beef and corn rations.
7 weeks into the siege, supplies inside Allesia were diminishing rapidly. The inhabitants subsisted on what little food had been stored before the encirclement began. Water for nearly 100,000 people had to be drawn from the rivers or wells on the plateau.
There's a story about one of Vercingetorix's tribesmen saying to him, let's just eat the dead soldiers and the citizens of the town. We could live a long time like that.
This wouldn't have been the first example of cannibalism, and it won't be the last. Think of the Donner Party in our own history.
You know, the old history books always call the Gauls barbarians, but they obviously had some humanity. Vercingetorix didn't allow this.
But he soon realized there were just too many hungry mouths to feed, and devised a plan that he hoped would save the lives of some of the women and children.
What he did is he sent them off to the Roman wall, essentially saying, look, let these people go, there's no point to this, or actually take them in as slaves.
Caesar rejected the offer. His own men were on the brink of starvation because the land around Allesia had been rendered utterly barren by the Gauls' scorched earth policy. He had scant sympathy for the desperate Gallic women and children who had no choice but to turn around and go back to Allesia. But Vercingetorix didn't want them back.
Having gotten rid of this large number of people that he no longer had to feed, that Vercingetorix himself refused to allow them back in the city walls, so that the women and children, large numbers of women and children, were trapped between the outer city wall and the inner Roman wall, where they were allowed simply to die of starvation.
Perhaps as many as 3,000 women and children were penned inside the no-go area, pawns in the battle of wills between Vercingetorix and Caesar.
All these pathetic souls just languishing in this kind of limbo. They're literally caught in the middle of this fight. No one wants them.
In this grim test of nerve, Vercingetorix was the first to relent.
Finally, the gates to Alesia open, and the townspeople re-enter. Caesar wins the Battle of Wills. Now the Gallic leader, Vercingetorix, doesn't get to transform his headache into Caesar's. And Caesar gets to remind people of just what kind of man they're dealing with.
The outlook for the Gauls was bleak. But then, 3 days later, a relief army some 60,000 strong appeared on the horizon. It was led by Comminus, or Commius, of the Atrebates tribe, a man Caesar knew well.
Comminus had been an ally to Caesar early on in the Gallic Wars. Vercingetorix had actually fought for Caesar also. So it was a real betrayal for Caesar to have these guys coming against him.
He immediately went on the offensive. Marching his infantry to the wall, he attacked the small number of Roman soldiers stationed outside it.
The Gauls were amazingly organized for a bunch of tribes that hadn't fought together until recently. They had infantry mixed in with the cavalry and covered the whole thing with archers and slingers.
Caesar had no choice but to commit 5,000 cavalry to defend the wall. They rode into a dense hail of arrows. Just when it seemed the Roman defenses would collapse, Caesar sent in reinforcements. His timing was perfect, and the fresh troops pushed the Gauls back onto the defensive.
Despite the incredible difference in numbers, Caesar pushes the Gauls back all the way to the hills, just massacring the archers who had been supporting the Gallic cavalry.
The battle raged from noon until sunset. As darkness fell, the Romans emerged victorious.
The Gauls' first assault ends in disgrace. The battle was nearly theirs. They had 4 times the number of soldiers and still could not defeat Caesar. This does not bode well.
But Vercingetorix was not ready to surrender. Somehow, he managed to coordinate with Commius to launch a nighttime, multi-pronged attack against the Roman positions.
We don't know a lot about how much Comminus and Vercingetorix could communicate with each other. Maybe they had spies who could sneak through, but in battle, I doubt they could communicate at all. It's just chaos.
Vercingetorix himself led the force attempting to break through the inner wall. Commius and his men attempted to scale the outer wall. A third Gallic force, also on the outside, tried to break through the outer wall on the far side of the city.
The Gauls are learning, trying different tactics. This time they've got the cover of darkness on their side, and they've got ladders and wall hooks to scale the walls.
Unfortunately for the Gauls, Caesar still has the upper hand. Up in the siege tower, he can easily see exactly what the Gauls are doing.
Holding the high walls, the legionaries easily repelled the Gauls below.
They were launching arrows, but also just this huge supply of stones and sharp sticks. Nothing sophisticated, but I wouldn't want someone standing 12 feet over me throwing stones at my head.
You're trying to fill in these ditches and moats, and the whole time, people are throwing deadly debris at you.
In between the walls, Vercingetorix was being pummeled mercilessly. And on the other side of the city, Caesar's siege machines were working to great effect.
The little presents that Caesar planted, the anti-personnel devices, are really paying off here.
These guys can't take a step without falling 10 feet onto a huge spike or getting a hook caught in their legs.
Caesar's brilliant siege planning was proving too clever for the Gauls.
Comnenus is being beaten on the outside, Vercingetorix is being beaten on the inside. The anti-personnel devices are killing Gauls right and left. And they both have this constant rain of Roman throwing spears and arrows coming down on them.
By daybreak, all the Gallic forces, both inside and outside the walls, were forced to withdraw. Once again, Caesar was the victor.
It's got to be driving Comnenus and Vercingetorix crazy. They have 3 times the army, yet they're spending most of their time filling up ditches and dying at the hands of the Romans.
Caesar's like a master chess player. By imprisoning Alessia, then building the second wall to repel the Gauls from the outside, he's neutralized the numbers advantage the Gauls have. Absolute genius.
5 more days passed. Starvation was taking its toll on the Gallic defenders. In increasing desperation, they tried to think of something, anything, to stop the Romans.
They were already beaten back twice, but they had to do something. The people inside were beyond being out of food.
Finally, Vercingetorix discovered the weak spot in the Roman outer wall near the foot of Mount Rhea. Because of the Ossa River running through it, Caesar couldn't join up his outer wall completely. This gap, Commius hoped to exploit.
So what they do is they sneak under cover of night to that weak spot tucked between the 2 hills, and they stay hidden in the woods.
At noon the next day, they attacked. Commius' men swarmed through the opening in the wall and laid into the Roman infantry. At another section of the wall, a second Gallic force attempted to break through.
The second Gallic force begins to overwhelm the wall. The Romans are simply running out of stuff to throw at them.
At the same time, Vercingetorix attacked from the inside. Caesar coolly observed this 3-pronged Gallic attack from the high vantage point of his siege tower.
Historians like to debate whether Caesar was really such a great tactician. But what he did at that final battle, it was like conducting an orchestra.
He decided to commit 3,600 troops to support his defenders at the gap in the wall.
He ordered reinforcement cavalry to come around from the northeast side to help protect the weak spot. But at the same time, the Gauls sent another 20,000 troops into the gap in the wall.
But you see, 20,000 men isn't going to do you a lot of good when you're trying to funnel them through essentially a narrow gap between 2 rivers while you're being opposed on both sides by legion camps and in the front by a ditch and a wall.
While Caesar watched, the Gauls changed tactics. If they couldn't get through the wall, they would tear it down.
By now, they're at the wall, and they're just tearing at these with these mural hooks. They're iron hooks designed for tearing down the walls of a besieged town.
Everything's kind of backwards because of Caesar's walls. Usually it's the conquering force that's using mural hooks, not the defenders.
The battle raged on all 3 fronts, neither side yielding. Caesar finally took matters into his own hands. He personally led 2,400 more men into the fray.
He takes command of 4 cohorts of infantry himself, puts on his famous red cloak. He always thought it important that troops should see their commander in battle, and leads these 4 cohorts right into the fray. The Roman line was ready to break until Caesar arrived at the last minute with the reinforcements.
And there he is, hacking at Gauls with his gladius, absolutely butchering them.
There's a big difference between a commander saying, charge, and one saying, follow me, boys. Patton wore a red cloak just because of Caesar.
Now that Caesar's there, the Roman legions put down all these pilum and javelins and things that they were throwing from a distance, and they pick up their swords and they just charge the Gauls.
Caesar had gained the momentum, and now he was going for the kill. More than 2 months into the siege of Allesia, Julius Caesar, wearing his famous blood-red cloak, led 2,400 men into battle against the Gauls.
And the texts say that what was happening is that the Roman line was ready to break until Caesar arrived at the last minute with these four cohorts with the reinforcements, and at the same time, you know, increasing Roman morale because they saw their commander fighting with them with the red cloak.
By evening, Caesar had gained the upper hand. He pursued the Gauls to their camp and cut them down like animals. Despite the impending, almost certain defeat, Vercingetorix fought on. His strategic plan to unite all the Gallic tribes in opposition to Roman oppression had failed. And very soon, Vercingetorix realized he had lost the war.
The defeat sends the message of kind of despair to the other tribes in the coalition. And after a day or two, one by one, as they had done so many times in the past, they began to wander back to their own tribal lands. And even Vercingetorix understands that the game is over. And he's the one who takes the initiative and opens negotiations with the Romans.
Caesar had gained a grisly reputation as the general who massacred entire tribes. But uncharacteristically, on this occasion, he decided to spare the lives of the Gallic warriors.
Caesar was pretty lenient. Way out of character for the guy who is famous for annihilating whole tribes. Maybe he sensed that in order to keep insurgents down, he had to change tactics. Maybe he even acquired a newfound respect for the way they had performed in battle. But of course, Vercingetorix had started this. He had to be made an example of.
The 2nd of October, 52 BC. After nearly 2 months of hunger and suffering, heroism and bloodshed, Vercingetorix surrendered.
Vercingetorix puts his best armor on and marches through the gate. Comes right up to Caesar.
And the thousands of Romans massed behind him and knelt in submission.
You can imagine the scene. Here's this guy who had dared to challenge Caesar, coming face to face with him.
He was a valiant warrior, but Vercingetorix had committed a basic tactical error.
He had a plan, not to take Caesar head on, but to skirmish, cut his communication, cut his supply lines, just harass him at every turn. He held on to that at times when he could have tried to go in for the kill, but he stayed disciplined.
Then he suddenly scrapped the whole idea. He sends his best fighters to go get help that didn't end up doing much good.
It's fascinating. He had hung to the original strategy right to the point where it was succeeding, and then, for whatever reason, changes the strategy, and it cost him dearly.
While many of the Gauls were freed, Vercingetorix was taken to Rome, chained in a cage, and executed.
And as the story goes, for which there's probably not much evidence, that during one of Caesar's triumphs, he was strangled in full public view. More likely, he was simply executed in a Roman dungeon. The Romans were not, I mean, they had no problems with public execution, but in this case, they were just well to be rid of what was called the firebrand of the Gauls, the man who was afraid that would light Gaul on fire.
Caesar spent the winter extinguishing the dying embers of the rebellion. Rome would not have to fight the Gauls again for the next 400 years.
One can compare Caesar to William Tecumseh Sherman, of the March through Georgia fame. In 1867, he was given the job of breaking the resistance of the Indians in the West. He used the exact same tactics, scorched earth, massacre, removal, starvation, against the Amerindian tribes that Caesar had against the Gallic tribes, and with the same results. He won. The Amerindians were settled on reservations and became American.
Allesia was a huge personal triumph for Julius Caesar, who at times had been the besieged as well as the besieger. And the outcome of this battle provided more than mere dramatic material for the victorious commander's memoirs.
The Battle of Allesia, in the long run, was one of the most beneficial things that happened to all of Europe, because what it did is it allowed the thorough Romanization of an enormous area from the Rhine all the way to the Pyrenees. What today we would call Western Europe was civilized and organized as a province of Rome, and then became, under the empire, essentially Italy and Rome itself. It got to a point where the Gauls never thought of themselves as anything except Romans.
Some historians say that Caesar's Gallic campaign was nothing but a vicious reign of terror. But at Allesia, he employed brilliant tactics to defeat a large army assailing him from 2 directions. The result was that Caesar not only destroyed the Gauls' fighting force, but he also united under Rome the tribes and the land that would develop into the independent nation of France.
And it all was made possible, ultimately, by the brilliance of a Julius Caesar and the defeat of Vercingetorix at the Battle and Siege of Allesia.